Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something.
We're already seeing this, and it has been published by veterinary schools and vets and scientists, so we know this happens. And it's also been documented in the Cold War, when women were deliberately microwaved. So we know it does happen. The documents are there. And what you're risking by putting Wi-Fi into schools is the future generations of all of these girls. But it gets worse, because this particular DNA, the mitochondrial DNA inside you, and the DNA inside you, the mitochondrial DNA, you can trace unchanged to your mother, her mother, her mother, right the way back to the beginning of the human race in Africa, the Stone Age. You can trace your ancestors, if you could, right back to the very first lady. It is unchanged, the mitochondria. And that is being unchanged in your children, which means if you damage it, your child could be genetically damaged, then her child, and her child, and her child, forever. You are condemning the future generations of every single child until there are no more lines left in the female in your family. You must stop. A female must stop producing children for this to stop. So when you put Wi-Fi in schools, what you're saying is, for the sake of a little bit of money that saves getting a workman in to drill holes through the walls to feed cable, because it's cheaper, we're just going to put Wi-Fi in, but you can have genetically damaged children for the rest of your family's career.
A lot of people listening to this will say, look, I thought this was studied, and if there was something bad here, we would already know about it.
From studies of the Hiroshima bombing, we know that brain cancer did not show up at all as increased until 40 years after that bombing occurred.
When you put it like that, it seems to make sense that we certainly just don't know. Enough time has not passed to be able to say anything definitive on this, yet the jury seems to be pretty clear on this.
Well, I don't think the jury's clear in other nations right now. I think the answer to that has to do with the old-fashioned issue, isn't it? The cell phone industry has been very, very powerful and is very influential on both sides of the aisle. All of us, including me, don't want to give up our phones.
Over 10 years, is the effect of using a phone, would you describe it as a cumulative problem? I mean, are you accumulating the problems in your brain?
It is a cumulative problem. As we know, happens with many things that can cause cancer. It may not be the one exposure. Look, we are born with repair processes. We get damage to our DNA every day just by breathing, sunlight, and whatnot. And if we eat well and exercise and don't have too much exposure, that damage gets repaired. For cell phone radiation, young people today are growing up in a sea of radio frequency radiation that did not exist even 5 years ago.
We've been surrounded by radiation for a long time. You're saying this new radiation has changed the amount that we're exposed to?
By billions and billions and billions of times. The amount of radio frequency radiation today is billions of times greater than occurred at the Big Bang, through which we evolved human life. I don't think all microwave radiation is necessarily problematic, and I recognize that microwaves play a very important role in many aspects of modern life. But I think direct microwave radiation of the brain, and that's why all the fine print warnings advise don't hold the phone directly on the body. And in fact, the test system for testing phones today, which gives you the specific absorption rate, uses a spacer here. For every millimeter away from the brain, you get a 15% reduction in radiation to the body.
What is the worst case scenario? If you extrapolate the numbers that you've just talked about, how bad could this be?
It could be a global epidemic. People do have a right to know there are simple things to do. We've got to have more of a public conversation about this. And we are poorly served by reassurances that everything is okay, by misuse of science. It's not helping us, it's not helping our children.
Our focus this week is cell phone safety. Now, during our investigation, we met Alan Marks. He's a successful businessman The remarkable story. Mark's life-changing battle with brain cancer led him on this unique journey that took him all the way to Capitol Hill, doing something he never expected to do. For Alan Marks, being in the real estate business for 30 years has been a passion.
I like building homes and seeing people move into them happy.
But 3 years ago, his life changed.
I had a seizure, I don't remember it.
The cause of that seizure, a malignant brain tumor. Now, surgeons were able to remove the cancer, but he says the recuperation was challenging.
It took a long time. Even now, I have some deficits, and you try to find ways to overcome them.
And there's something else. Marks feels responsible for his own cancer.
I know what it is. It was my cell phone use. There's no way you could put something to your head for 20 years and not have it cause something.
But still, there are many cell phone manufacturers that recommend that you do not put the phone next to your head. And that is something Marks and his family support.
I still use my phone. I usually use a speakerphone or I use a headset.
Marks and his wife are urging lawmakers around the country to require manufacturers to put warnings directly on the phones. They believe having the safety information in the manual simply isn't enough.
So, isn't this regulated? And this is one of the most interesting things I've found. The Federal Communications Commission is who is supposed to be regulating wireless technology. But if you look at the regulations, they're almost 20 years old. So that means our most advanced technology is using science that's at least 20 years old. But not only that, they're based on a concept which is nearly 50 years old, which says if microwave radiation does not heat us, then it can't possibly hurt us. But there's now hundreds of studies that show that this is false.
But we are 20 years into the use of them with some intensity, and we have from the American Cancer Society a statement that in general, expert agencies agrees that most evidence does not point to cell phone use increasing the risk of tumors. Yeah. She says fast. And also an FDA statement. So far, studies have not shown any bad effects for anyone from cell phone RF. So the bottom line on the studies so far?
Well, until recently, I think those were pretty good encapsulations of what was found, which is that over the periods of time examined, 3 to 5 years of cell phone use, you weren't finding differences. But there have been some recent studies that have been alarming.
Now, I should say, we also had a long conversation with John Walls from the industry group that represents cell phone makers. They maintain that they're following the radiation guidelines enforced by our own government and defer to the FCC, who say that cell phones are safe. We also tried several times to ask the FCC, how can they be so sure cell phones are safe, based on the data that we've all seen, and ask why don't they independently test phones for safety. They wouldn't speak to us about this. They just referred us to their website, which responds to the skeptics, urging caution by saying, quote, the FCC does not endorse the need for any of these practices. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, they set the guidelines for how much radiation a cell phone can emit, and they say cell phones are safe. But how can they be so sure? Keeping them honest, we decided to come here to try and find out for ourselves, but they declined an on-camera interview.
Something the authors of the study acknowledge, though they do warn the findings should not be directly extrapolated to human cell phone usage, and the American Cancer Society has contended the evidence for an association between cell phone and cancer is weak.
I think they are engaging in problem minimization to some extent.
Now, while there are some studies suggesting cell phones pose a health risk, many others do not. As a trade group representing cell phone manufacturers tells CNN, numerous experts and government health and safety organizations around the world have reviewed the existing database of studies and ongoing research and concluded that RF products meeting established safety guidelines pose no known health risk.
And understand that the World Health Organization reviewed the evidence on this with experts who were independent, and they concluded that cell phone radiation was in the same category as DDT and engine exhaust. Now, we take steps for DDT and engine exhaust. We won't give those things to children to play with.
Right. So how is it that we have a regulatory body that's not protecting the public? Well, like many issues, like many public health issues in our country, you end up having industry influencing the regulatory body. And that's what's happening here. So you have a revolving door between the wireless lobby and the FCC commission. So that's what's happening. Plus, the science is heavily influenced by industry funding. This is a study by Dr. Henry Lai. He looked at 326 studies based on the biological effects of cell phone radiation. He found that about half of the studies showed effects and half didn't. That's pretty normal for this type of research. But what he found that was interesting was that if you looked at who funded the studies, 70% of the independent studies showed effects, and only 32% of the industry-funded studies showed effects. So you see that there's an influence in money on this topic. Just like many other topics, tobacco is another one where essentially the industry funded science that was going to show their products were safe. If you simply Google EMF research, this is a screenshot of what you'll find. The World Health Organization is the first link there, and they actually in 2011 came out and said this wireless technology is possibly carcinogenic. Now there's scientists around the world that say that it's most likely carcinogenic. The third link there is actually my own website. It's there because the last 5 years I've gathered research from around the world that shows that we now have enough evidence to at least take precaution when it comes to this technology.
Meanwhile, wireless safety advocates like Moskowitz take the report as yet another signal not to get too close to your cell phone.
Use speakerphone, text, keep the cell phone away from your head. Don't store the cell phone directly on your body if it's turned on.
He also advises not using your phone when the connection is poor, and don't make calls while driving.
When you're moving about, the cell phone is constantly searching for new cell towers, and so it's putting out more radiation.
It's advice that could make you a less distracted driver as well. Andrea Borba, KPIX5.
Where you follow people for longer periods of time. And Diane, remember that if you're going to look at something very subtle like radio frequency waves affecting brain cells, you have to study them over a decade. So guess what? Because of some of these studies, Britain, France, and Israel have now offered advisories cautioning us, not telling us not to use cell phones, but cautioning us to be smart.
Let's run through these precautions. Under the age of 14?
I think children ought to be texting if they can. Believe it or not, for the first time ever on national TV, we're endorsing texting. And if they are going to use cell phones, it's important for them to use them on a speakerphone mode or with a cordless headset.
Hold it away from you.
And here's why. If you even move the phone 4 inches from your head, instead of holding it plastered to the skull, 4 inches away, 1,000 times less effect of radio frequency waves. Big difference.
Can you hear me now? It's just fine. Headsets also, with the wires on them, are a good thing. But let me ask you about this. This surprised me. If the signal is poor, or if it's interrupted when you're driving, you're getting more of the radio frequency waves inside your head?
You are. And remember that animation that I showed? Part of the problem that we have is those waves have to boost up from your cell phone to find the tower. So if you're traveling in a car, the highest intensity of those waves is when the cell phone shifts from one tower to the next. If you're in an elevator, same thing. If you're going into a poor part of wherever you live, you would need to be very cautious about using a cell phone there.
And if it's interrupted and has to power back up?
Just hold it a little further from your head. These are, by the way, simple changes. I'm not getting rid of my cell phone, and I don't think you are either. These are things I think we can do as precautions.
Do you like those wireless earpieces we see people walking around with, like big earrings in their ear?
Well, you know, here's an example. When if you're using them like a piece of jewelry, no. And so these wireless pieces
just don't wear it all the time.
Right. They actually do reduce the radiation effect, the energy, the radio frequency wave effect quite dramatically. But if you're wearing them all the time, then they're always being a receiver. They're always pulling waves towards you.
Let's get to another question now. This one, I text on my phone more often than talking. Is radiation from texting the same as a phone call? Nishita writes that from her CNN blog. Here's the good news, is that it's not. Texting actually is a much safer alternative. The amount of radiation that you absorb goes off exponentially as you move the phone away from your ear. You could also use speakerphone, and you could use a wired earpiece. People around this building know that I use my wired earpiece all the time. I've been talking about it for some time. It's a simple thing to do to mitigate your risk. Not asking people to turn their lives upside down. It just simply comes down to trying to decrease your risk and waiting for more of these studies to come out.
use it in speakerphone mode, for example?
Absolutely. Use it in speakerphone, use it with a headset. I keep my phone on airplane mode right now, and just I'm using it to show you this.
Sure.
There are ways to use phones more safely. I'm not telling you not to use phones, because of course they can be useful. But I think everyone needs to use their phones a lot less than they do, and to know that distance is your friend, and if you talk less, you'll be better off. You can use the phone as long as you keep it away from your body, but in general, we're using phones for a lot of rather silly purposes.
Something else that I think intuitively wondered about, but you said, don't keep them in your pocket. Don't keep your cell phone in your pocket. Why?
Because the effect of the radio frequency waves resides, and no matter where it is. And there's a study recently from the Cleveland Clinic showing, guess what? You can actually affect the sperm in males with these devices. So if you have an option of putting it in the purse or not keeping it on your body, take advantage of it. If every once in a while you got to put it on your belt, fine. But this should not be, again, a part of your dressing every morning.
So one of the primary things we can do is to move towards fiber optics, because this is a way that we can make our homes safer, our businesses, and our schools. So fiber optics are safe, they're secure, and there's absolutely, they're one of the fastest things we can use. Another way we can go is to design products which are safer. So currently we have product designers and engineers working together, but we can bring in biophysicists and biologists to work together to create products that don't just emit right underneath the FCC regulations, but emit the least amount of any type of electromagnetic fields as possible. If smart meters had been designed to use either fiber optics or to emit just once or twice a day, rather than the 10,000 times they do emit, then I wouldn't be standing here today, and thousands upon thousands of people around the world would not have been injured by smart meters. So what are some things that all of us can do? This is one of the most important things, because everyone wants to know how to essentially protect themselves and their families. So the first thing is to make sure we use our cell phones wisely. I mentioned that you don't want to put the cell phone within about an inch of the body. The industry's telling us this now. So make sure you use speakerphone, get an air tube headset, and when it's on the body, make sure that you put it on airplane mode, when it's either in the pocket or sometimes in the bra. And when it comes to kids, we don't want to have kids use cell phones, but if they must, then please teach them how to use these wisely. We can wire our homes. This is, most people don't need Wi-Fi in their home. So move towards Ethernet, move towards fiber optics, and if you must have Wi-Fi, make sure you turn it off at night. You can get a simple timer so you don't even have to think about it. When it comes to kids, we want to reduce their exposures as much as possible. So if they use an iPad, put all of the data on the iPad and then turn the Wi-Fi off. In schools, I simply do not think we need to have Wi-Fi in schools, because we're filling those classrooms with microwave radiation. We can have amazing technology, but it can be wired. And this is where I think we're going to have to go. When it comes to the smart meter and the smart home, I recommend you opt out. I've had wealthy, early adopting families contact me who went all in on the smart home, and they ended up getting sick within a few months. So this is something that affects families, and I just recommend that you don't go down this path, because it's a technology we do not need. And one of the last things I want to, solutions I want to give today is to create a safe place to sleep, because this is one of the most important things, because this is when your body rejuvenates, and it's when you can make sure that everything's off. So turn off all your wireless devices, unplug things. If you have a baby monitor, I actually recommend that you turn that off, especially at night. I just do not recommend those for kids.